veterinary issues.
Yeah, because you know they have to follow HIPAA, right?
Well, yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Well, you know that story. You remember the lady who told me she was in one of my classes and she said, I found a stray dog that needed help. I took it to the vet. I called the vet to ask how the dog was doing later in the day. And they told me, we can't tell you because of HIPAA.
I know.
No way. No way.
I know.
You're listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, where HIPAA and humor collide to make learning fun. Your delightful hosts are Donna Grindle and David Sims. Relax. HIPAA help is on the way.
Welcome to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast. My name is David Sims of HIPAA for MSP, and joining me is Donna Grindle of Card Done Compliance. Guess what, Donna?
What, David?
There's an app for that.
Yes, there is.
Oh, yes. We are in the App Store.
Hoop, hoop. Yeah.
Soon to be in the Google Play Store. I guess by the time this airs, it'll be in the Google Play Store.
Yeah, it will be. They're assured me that it will. And after that, we can elect to have it in the Amazon store and the Windows Phone app store, which I didn't even know they had.
There's Windows Phone still?
Yeah, I know. But for a Fire tablet or whatever, you could have it on there and be able to do some cool stuff. But once it gets rolled out everywhere and we get some people using it, we can start including some other cool stuff, little bonus features and stuff you'll get. And you have the ability to mark your favorites and choose which ones to download to your device. So you can listen to it straight from the device and not have to stream it and use your data plan, as some people pointed out.
Mm-hmm.
But the ability for those, because some folks reference some of them regularly, and the ability to keep your favorites so that you can go back to them and know which episode it is, I think will be helpful.
Yeah.
One of the many things we'll be doing with it later, but we can start including like PDFs and really cool stuff like that.
Nice.
I know. I'm excited.
Yeah. I do have to kind of poke at you, though, because, we had an episode a while back where I had mentioned different ways to listen to podcasts, and you made a comment about, well, if they're listening to the podcast now, then why are you telling them how to listen to the podcast? But we had somebody at the boot camp when it was like, I listen to your podcast, but is there another way I can listen to it? And I'm like, see?
You're right. You're right. Okay, so this is Market 2017, the one time I'm going to tell David he's right on it.
I just need once a year. Just once a year is all I need.
That's all it takes, right?
Yeah.
And you're feeling okay.
Yeah, but the HIPAA boot camp was awesome. I had a great time with the people who showed up, so that was great.
Yeah, I did. I really, when everybody's leaving and they're like, I learned so much, and this was very valuable. But at the same time, you could see that when they're walking out with their little action plans, they're cramming them all in as much as possible into 2017 because they just don't want to face 2018.
I noticed that too.
We give them the ability to spread it out. Nope, I'm cramming it in fourth quarter. So
just rip that Band-Aid off. Let's get it done.
But yeah, we were talking with them, so they're downloading the app and getting ready to use some of the new tools. And all of them, though, I think have listened to the podcast. That was cool.
Yeah.
So shout out to all you guys that were there, and we appreciate you traveling to see us, and looking forward to hearing how you progress with your action plans.
Yeah. What was funny was when we would cover something or say something, somebody would be like, yeah, you talked about that on a podcast a few weeks ago. I'm like, oh, yeah, we did, didn't we?
Yeah. Shout out to Chris, because he was the one that referenced the podcast more than anybody else. He knew what was in every episode.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, he's wired that way, though.
Being a lawyer and all. So.
I know. He never forgets anything.
So when you go download the app from the App Store, it's funny because we've been telling people about it since it came out. It just came out it's just been 1 week, whenever all the delays here. It came out after we recorded the last episode, and I've told multiple people, and they say, I can't find it. And I was like, how did you spell HIPAA?
Yeah. Just
yes.
no PP, just one P.
No PP. That's right. That's right, Ray. No PP. Ray and Rob love the no PP in HIPAA. So
it's just AA.
Yeah.
Just think.
Yep.
Yeah.
Download the Help Me with HIP podcast. Should be in the Apple App Store, the Google Play Store. And make sure that you rate us somewhere, please. Because you can rate us now in the app stores. You can rate us on Stitcher. You can rate us in iTunes. You can just post something on our Facebook page and tell all your friends how awesome we are. We haven't been asking for that. And until the end, David would go, oh, yeah, rate us. But now that we're rolling this stuff out, we really need your help giving us the ratings so that the app will become,
helps other people find it easier.
Yeah, well, we'll go with that.
Help spread the word. So, and you can't do 2 ratings. You can't rate Donna and me. I mean, so just give me 5 stars and, we won't worry about Donna because...
We all know that's the other way around, brother.
Okay, so we'll move right along.
All right, where to see us?
All right, so I will be in D.C. at the Unconvention IT Conference in September 16th and 17th. I'll be speaking about HIPAA. Still trying to narrow down exactly how I want to take that that discussion because,
1 hour.
Yeah, I got 1 hour and I have to do it twice, so it's basically the same thing 2 times. But, speaking about HIPAA for an hour, especially when somebody says, I want you to talk about everything that we need to know about HIPAA in an hour.
We just did a 2-day class to get you prepared to do it, not to do everything you need to know.
It's like, I don't even know if I can do an overview in an hour. But anyway, I want to make it extremely valuable for those who attend, but it's probably going to be focused extremely detailed on what IT needs to be concerned with, since for some reason that's still questionable.
Yeah, true that.
So, and you'll be in Georgia a whole bunch coming up.
Yeah, I got the Georgia HFMA Care Forum about compliance on September 22nd at the on Peel Hill in Sandy Springs. Then I just booked a new one with the Georgia Pediatric Practice Administrators Association, October 13th at the Cobb Energy Center. Thanks to them. My North Metro MGMA, they've had me on the schedule all year long to be there in October. Georgia HFMA Fall Institute, it was a package deal, so I'm doing 2 of those with them. And the Georgia Association of Orthopedic Executives, both of those are the first week of November. One's November the 8th at Reynolds Plantation with HFMA, and then November 10th at Callaway Gardens with the Orthopedic Executives, and it looks pretty close. We're discussing, I think we're getting close to, an agreement for me to be in SoCal in April.
South Carolina.
No.
It's only at USC.
But I think, barring some unforeseen issues, I will be speaking at a national conference in Southern California in April 2018, which means maybe we could do some other planning and do some other stuff when we're out there because we got people.
Mm-hmm. Well, that brings us to the point too. And I mentioned, I think last week, if any listener is interested in having a HIPAA boot camp in your area, let us know. And we are looking at other places around the country that may be interested in the boot camp and putting one on. So reach out to Carla.
Carla at cardoncompliance.com, and that would be Carla with a K, like in car.
Don.
Cardon. Kardon. Carla, Karla. Yeah, we're dumping that problem on her.
Yep. So yeah, reach out to her, let her know, and then we can see what we can do to put one in your area.
She'll be glad to hear we've dumped that on her.
You notice I didn't ask.
I know. Why?
Yeah. Forgiveness, permission, forgiveness. So anyway, today we're going to dive into some disaster recovery things because we're moving into hurricane season. As a matter of fact, as we're recording, we have Hurricane Harvey beating the crap out of Texas. So
yeah, it sounds like it's going to look really bad for those guys. It's still going on right now. But it's catastrophic devastation is the words that keep coming out of that area so far. I really feel for those folks because it is not going to be an easy recovery if that's where they're at.
Yeah, and they get hit pretty good. All the bordering coastal states can have issues, but it seems like Texas, Louisiana area seems to get hit more frequently than most.
It just feels like that, you know. But we haven't had a really severe season in a while. But this one hit. It went ashore at a Category 4, and everybody worries about the Category 4, which is talking about the winds, which that's fierce, and we've seen the devastation that the eye of the storm and all of that can happen. But it's the flooding, which everybody needs to understand. Flooding. Mm-hmm. There are flood issues from time to time in Arizona, for goodness sake. So
I got some property out there. Beachfront, baby.
Oh, Lord. But you never know when flooding can occur. We just had, one of the boot camp attendees was talking about how the suite next to them had a toilet that ran all weekend long and flooded their suite too. Mm-hmm. And it was just not a good story that she was telling about. I couldn't believe that somebody didn't want their feet to get wet, so they put down charts to...
No, we heard some great stories at boot camp.
Oh, my God.
That's for sure. For sure.
So flooding is a big issue. So what we're actually reviewing is the things that you need to worry about in disaster recovery. But more importantly, there are resources available, and you should be using them for your disaster recovery planning and any time you're in preparation where, at least with these hurricanes, it's coming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you should plan and prepare. Otherwise, when things happen, and they're going to happen at some point, but you don't want to be in a completely, reactive mode where you don't have anything, any plans, who's in charge, who to call. You don't want to be in that situation because it's already going to be bad enough. And there are lots that you can do to limit how bad that is on you by being prepared to respond.
Mm-hmm. So, OCR, if you're on their list, which we've talked about before, they have some great things that they publish on their listserv, which we give you the link to. They sent out this week a memo from the HHS Critical Infrastructure Protection Program in advance of Hurricane Harvey. And the memo stated, the federal government continues to monitor Hurricane Harvey and deploying assets in response to the event. Hurricane Harvey's current forecast track will approach the middle Texas coast on Friday and make landfall Friday night or early Saturday, which indeed it did. Mm-hmm. Harvey is then likely to stall near or just inland of the middle Texas coast this weekend, which is the really, really concerning part because that thing was loaded with moisture. Maximum sustained winds near 85 miles per hour, higher gust, and on with the details of the storm itself they include. And then they say, please consider stocking supplies needed through the weekend and notifying customers of ways they can prepare. Considerations for prescription medicines, dialysis, and other medical care and services for the duration of these weather systems. So that's an important point that we often don't discuss when we're talking about disaster recovery and preparedness. Mm-hmm. Is you don't just have to worry about getting yourself back up and running and keeping yourself back up and running when the patients come to you. It's really, if you are a provider of care, a good idea that you're educating your patients on what they should be doing as well. That's part of, their care is notify your patients in some way or another, alert, make sure you have prescription meds, particularly those that I see a lot of Medicare patients where, they may not have access to as many resources as others do.
Yeah.
I know my brother-in-law is worked for the fire department, a paramedic and a captain, and he did all this stuff. And during the hurricanes in Florida that we had back where they were just being pounded with hurricanes, it was 2007, I want to say. But at any rate, when they were getting hit, he would be there, and one of his jobs was to move people from hospitals and care spaces to more safe locations if they were in the path of the storm. So there's a lot of preparations that go into these things. And if you run these surgery centers and care centers and senior centers, that's part of their plans, particularly if you're in a hurricane area. But that doesn't mean that other people shouldn't have it.
Right. So Well, let's look at a couple things. First, let's look at some tools that are out there because, everybody wants to have tools and checklists. And I think there's some good ones out there, and we'll get to those in just a second. And then let's talk about some specific HIPAA guidelines about how to respond and how HIPAA is treated during a disaster, because there are some things that can change with HIPAA and how you look at that and deal with that. And I think there's a lot of questions about it because some of it kind of gets kind of hairy, because some people is like throw HIPAA out the window, and other people are like, no, you can't throw HIPAA out the window. So, there's just some nuances there. So we'll look at that too. So let's talk about the tools first.
All right. Well, first there's they give you the link to the NOAA Hurricane Center, and you can track the storms. And I was interested when I went out there that not only was it showing me the track of Harvey, but there's actually a big yellow X out there.
Near Florida.
It's sitting right over Central Florida. And I was like, oh, wow, nobody's talking about that. So you can see at the National Hurricane Center, they're showing you other tropical disturbances that they're tracking that would affect, all up and down the coast. And don't forget, Hurricane Sandy didn't hit tropical areas. It hit way up the coast, So a lot of those people in the Jersey Shore were really hit hard during that one. So it's not just something you worry about in the Gulf Coast or Florida or whatnot. And you certainly have to be prepared for hurricanes as well there in the Carolinas.
Yeah,
even though you're not near the coast.
Yeah, I'm just below Charlotte, and of course, it's been a long time ago, but you remember Hurricane Hugo back in '89. Everybody was talking about how it was going to come, in to hit landfall and all that. And we have never, at least in my lifetime, ever seen a real effects of a hurricane other than just some winds and some rain, nothing major. But dude, that thing completely caught us by surprise this far inland. And nobody that was living in that time will ever forget the fact that it hit at night and, trees were coming down everywhere and the winds were crazy. And at the time I was part of a emergency response team in my area, and I couldn't even get out of my neighborhood because trees were down everywhere.
Really?
So much for emergency response. But I was literally out in it, like standing on top of tree limbs in the road, trying to drive the truck over top of the trees, and I couldn't do it. Couldn't get out of the neighborhood.
Wow.
So that was kind of bad. And then we had power out everywhere. Power was out at our home, but not at our office. So we had to go move into our office for a couple of weeks. All of our food spoiled. Gas went crazy high in price, and you couldn't hardly. We had like one place in town with gas. It was just terrible.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing of catching people by surprise, and there's really no way to know what will happen with these things. And how far are you from the coast?
Probably 150 miles.
Yeah. And Katrina, we know how far inland that thing went, and not just, from a storm standpoint, but even the surge went so far inland. So these super storms that we get, and no matter what your opinions are about climate change, it's irrelevant. We're getting big storms.
Right.
Why we're getting them is irrelevant. We have to plan for getting them. So, as far as being able to plan for these things, don't ever, it's just like anything else with response planning, disaster planning, don't play the it won't happen to me. It's just, that's a horrible, horrible planning approach. Do the Murphy's Law. And say, well, okay, how far inland? Because we actually had a storm, Hurricane Opal, hit the Gulf Coast, and by the time it was at Atlanta, it still had 80-mile-an-hour winds, which was in the lower hurricane levels. So to say that you wouldn't think that Atlanta would need to worry about hurricanes, but we do. So, but the bigger piece, and we know everybody needs to worry about it, is flooding, and that's what's happening now, is horrible flooding. So one of the things that the tools that they gave us in the OCR mailing, which was great, by the way, hats off to them because it had some awesome links in it that stuff I didn't even know was out there, frankly, you know.
Yeah, they have an app too.
Yeah, there's an app for that. The FEMA mobile app, which, don't you know, I'll be downloading. I just haven't had time to play with it. But it has disaster resources, weather alerts, and safety tips, including checklists.
Yeah.
How about that? And it's customizable check. Okay, you're going to handle that.
Well, you get, I mean, not only do you get the safety reminders, you can get weather alerts from up to 5 locations that you pick. And you can find out where, you know, there's shelters are and FEMA stuff. And you can even upload disaster photos. So,
and share them. Yeah. And recovery centers, survival tips, all kinds of things. So it's a great app. And I think all of us should be utilizing that resource.
Yep.
But another area that, and you know, you and I were exchanging emails about this just recently about why don't we reference that more? And I just hadn't had an opportunity to talk about this resource, but we have been, you know, between the two of us going, wow, I didn't even know this was out here. I don't remember what prompted it. It was about a couple months ago. But HHS ASPR is the Office of Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response, and they have a site. It's a project called TRACIE, TRACIE, Technical Resource Assistance Center and Information Exchange. So what we're just going to call it from now on, now that we've said the official stuff, we'll just say, you know, that HHS TRACIE thing. There you go. But it's got a ton of great stuff, and they hadn't been really promoting it, but this is the second or third time I've seen them use it as a resource, but it's full of technical resources to explain things you should worry about, how to get information from a technical standpoint, not just, you know, the generic FEMA stuff, but on the resources. And, you know, you pick a topic. So they'll say, this is your hurricane topic. And in the hurricane topic, here's all the things. And you just search the different collections of information. And it even includes things like specific patient care topics, veterinary issues.
Yeah, because you know they have to follow HIPAA, right?
Well,
I'm just kidding.
Well, you know that story. You remember the lady who told me she was in one of my classes and she said, I found a stray dog that needed help. I took it to the vet. I called the vet to ask how the dog was doing later in the day. And they told me, we can't tell you because of HIPAA.
I know.
No way.
I know. I've seen people post stuff online about, you know, information from the vet being somebody heard something about their dog or whatever, and it's a violation of HIPAA. And I just crack up.
It's like, how can you? Oh.
But anyway, it's there.
So, but there's videos, there's all kinds of information out on that site. And of course, we're going to have links to all of that on the webpage, which you can listen to the podcast on the webpage, by the by. But they have a massive amount, they call it Disaster Lit, and it's a registered trademark. I'm not quite sure the deal. Resource Guide for Disaster Medicine and Public Health. It's a database with 10,000 records, no cost, online disaster medicine and public health documents. It's selected from 1,100 resources. I mean, this is a very valuable resource, but it's an excellent thing, and we probably need to do a little bit more discussion on it later, but I'm pleased that they're also including that, and they call it the Resources at Your Fingertips document that they link to, and we'll have that link, but it's loaded with information about all kinds of things for disaster response and information exchange.
Yeah, because I mean, they even have things, you know, like how to protect your networks from ransomware, which, you know, we talk about. Helping victims of mass violence and terrorism. You know, that's one thing that now you need to be putting in your risk assessments and your action plans about how you're going to deal with active shooter situations in your area or something like that, because just this week in Charleston, they had an active shooter scenario going on downtown, and all the local businesses in that area, you know, went on lockdown. So that's something that most people haven't thought about.
That was another story we heard about. You know, we heard some really crazy stuff. that one lady who, without saying anything, the other Donna, I would think we could interview her and get all kinds of great stories based on the things she shared. I'm like, whoa.
Yeah, then you have, domestic disputes that end up somehow in your office. And I mean, it's just tons and tons of stuff. And you can't possibly say there's a low probability that we'll have a domestic dispute or active shooter. I mean, it's pretty high. I mean, you might not have one right in your office, but you may have one that will affect your office. I think it's a pretty high thing these days. And, I even said something at boot camp about, people nowadays, it's not even the active shooter stuff. It's like crazy drivers and, ramming through people and stuff. I mean, you got to think about how you're going to deal with all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And you never know where people are going to. Domestic violence now spreads into the workplace much more frequently than we should, but it's not something that we can say one way or another what we think about it. We just have to plan for it and give up on it.
Yeah. And if you're using natural gas water heaters and you have a gas leak, what are you going to do? I mean, there's tons of stuff.
Yeah. So excellent resource, that HHS Tracy thing. There's also
the Tracy thing.
There's also ready.gov.
I like ready.gov.
Yeah. It's a great resource that talks about what to do before, during, and after weather.
Mm-hmm.
So it's specifically devoted to that kind of disaster or issue.
Yeah.
And you can get, and for general public, everybody. And in fact, most of everything that we've had here are things that we've discussed anyway, are things that everyone could use information for. But ready.gov, you go there and it's like how to make your home and your family ready for flooding.
Mm-hmm.
What about extreme heat? And, if it become part of the FEMA citizen responder program. I mean, there's massive amounts of information that's available free of charge.
Yeah. And
with publications and brochures, and educate your people and yourself and use what's out there, people.
Yeah. And the thing I like about it is it is geared to everybody. So it's not just a medical thing. Your family can do it. Your standard business can do it. In fact, anytime I've ever had to speak on disaster recovery or, business continuity or whatever, I've always went to ready.gov and actually downloaded their disaster recovery checklist and forms and all that, because they give you everything you need to fill out, make a list of everything that is critical for your business or your family, and then decide how you're going to have that resource if something happens. I mean, they give you the whole checklist and everything, so it's a great resource.
Well, they even have a plan for kids and a section for kids to learn about it. So, there's never a bad time to teach your kids about these things, because when it happens is not the time to be figuring it out.
Mm-hmm.
So disaster preparedness is a good thing for all of us, no matter what stage we may be in, because you got to have a plan for it. So.
Yeah, what was the one where the hospital had like tons of flashlights for an emergency, but no batteries?
Yeah, they realized we had tons of flashlights and they all were loaded with batteries, but when the batteries died, no one had a stock of extra batteries.
Yeah.
So it's like, what's one of the top things they learned? And I heard somebody being interviewed saying, extra batteries. you know, the devices that you're going to plan on using. And in that case, they just didn't expect the power to be out that long or to need as many flashlights as they did. So, but yeah, you got to think of every little thing. And that's what makes disaster preparedness a very complicated area in healthcare, but one that's absolutely vital. And that's why it's part of HIPAA, because, again, HIPAA is just telling you the things that are absolutely vital to protecting your business, your patients, and being a strong community member as a healthcare provider, because that is part of our critical infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good segue into HIPAA and how it's going to apply to an emergency situation. We certainly know that when we're dealing with emergency situations and HIPAA, we know that we should have a disaster recovery plan because it's part of HIPAA. We know we have to have preparedness, we have to have planning, we have to have a response. There are certain things in the privacy rule as well as security that we have to consider. But there's also some things that we'll discuss in a little bit too about some potential waivers that could come out, depending on, who decides to make that happen. So we'll get to that, but let's look at what HIPAA has to say about how we should respond in a situation like this. You got nothing.
Just messing with you.
You got nothing.
Just messing with you. I was going to see what you meant to say. But, one of the HIPAA requires that you have an incident response plan, they call it a contingency plan, which is the business continuity plan, usually is what we think of it as, and then a disaster recovery plan. And basically you need to have, what am I doing during the crisis? What am I going to do to keep everything running and be able to provide services as we're in the recovery period? And then how am I going to recover? So you're going to have all three of those technically going on at the same time. And then slowly but surely you drop the crisis part, then you drop the continuity part, and you're back to recovered. Mm-hmm. So they launch 1, 2, 3, and then they close 1, 2, 3. And in your plans, and I don't care what business you are, you should have a plan. And people will be like, yeah, we know how we'll work remote. Everybody just dials in. Okay, there's going to need to be more than that, because can you function that way as a company for 3 months? Mm-hmm. How are you going to do those things? And parts of HIPAA are, those parts that require those plans are addressing that as a bigger issue in the process to say, we're not talking about, you got 2 or 3 days to deal with something. You have a major issue to deal with, as well as those minor things. And that's what HIPAA requires us to be prepared for. It doesn't give us any absolute specifics as to what must be in the plan, but they do give you all kinds of guidance. And one of their guidance, they'll say, is emergency preparedness planning and the privacy rule, because we cannot just forget about disclosures. All bets are off. Everybody just do what you want to do.
Yep.
But, you're part of your plan, and we've had a discussion about this before after the Pulse nightclub tragedy, and how important it is for your people to know what they can and cannot do from a privacy standpoint during a crisis. Mm-hmm. And we have that other one. But during all of these kinds of scenarios, they do have resources to kind of give you a clue the things you should think about in your plan. But there is no cut and dry thing, and it's not a cookie cutter thing. So don't think there will be. But I do appreciate these additional tools that they've included, which goes into emergency planning, and as well as what you can and cannot do from a privacy standpoint. And they've even added a decision tool to help you determine what you can and cannot do as far as the permitted disclosures and all those things. But the one thing we keep trying to point out in our discussions when we do this is patient care comes first.
Right.
Patient care comes first. And it's not any of this other, this is what I would love to care for you, but HIPAA says I can't. You know what? We should start doing that. I would love to fix your computer, but HIPAA says I can't. But there are plenty of tools and guides out there, and we'll have a lot of links to those. But that decision tool is, I haven't played with it a lot. I didn't even know they had published it. I'm not quite sure, how it works or any of that kind of stuff. But the fact that they're even including that lets you know that we know that's another problem you should be worried about. Mm-hmm. And then you've got public health issues after a disaster. So we've got these floods. We're going to have mold issues. You could potentially have, and remember, floods are pushing, especially along the coast, you have to worry about snakes and gators and poisonous stuff getting pushed into areas where they didn't intend to go. Because, the water took them there. They didn't come there on their own. But at the same time, everybody's in this one place, and they're just as displaced and confused as we are. They just don't know how to have a disaster recovery plan. All the gators got together. But anyway, the information that is available from HHS and OCR for HIPAA guidelines on the emergency preparedness and planning areas, and they show their different guides and press releases. They show what they've disclosed about, after Hurricane Katrina, they had bulletins and law enforcement and emergency situations. So we've had tons of bulletins, and they include all of those from where we learned things before. And that's another piece that you have to do in your emergency plan, is to say, after this is said and done, I'm going to want to remember things that I need to do things about.
Yeah. And that's definitely something that you should do. And if you don't have something that happens in your area, it's a good idea to look at what happened in, let's say, Texas. Next week, when all this is said and done and Texas is done, Harvey's gone, look at what would you have done had this happened in your area, and start planning then. Don't wait until after. Oh, yeah, we'll get that after we get one and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, it's paying attention and knowing that these things can happen. It can occur once they declare, there's a process and there's a reason when they make an announcement that, okay, well, the governor's declared an emergency and requested a federal emergency or disaster. And then once the federal one is, and you have to go through those processes. If you don't request it at a certain time, and you would think we would throw that out the window. But the law in place and the way money gets spent requires certain things to occur. Mm-hmm. So the governor has to declare something to activate state resources, and then they have to request that the president declare something to activate federal resources. And if that request doesn't happen at the right time, everybody blames the governor. One of the governors during Katrina didn't make the request at the right time, or thought they had made, I don't remember what it was, but lost her job. The overall process, though, once those things start occurring, the reason that you have to do that is that initiates the legal changes that can occur, like, you mentioned waivers. Okay, well, that happens if the president declares a disaster or emergency, and then the Secretary of Health and Human Services can declare a public health emergency, and they can waive sanctions and penalties if you're doing stuff. But you've got to know what process has to take place in order to even know if that could happen. Mm-hmm. Things like they could waive the authorizations, but they could also waive the requirement to distribute privacy practices.
Right.
They could waive the request of being in writing for confidential communications. So there's a lot of different things that can happen, but until you hear that the governor's requested it and then the president's done it, then, and in this case, yes, it's happened. All those things have happened. So now the next question is, okay, what other things have occurred? And it can be done. And if something happens and you're in that designation as a federal emergency or disaster area, things can be handled differently. And you don't need to think that patient care is going to fall behind during an emergency any more than it would any other time.
Right. And you also have to remember that this is when the waivers do happen, mm-hmm. they're not indefinite.
Exactly. They're during the emergency period.
Yeah. So it's like, last year we got waiver HIPAA stuff. We don't have to do that anymore. But yeah, it's only for the emergency area. So I mean, like if something happened in Texas, then we in South Carolina can't say, well, the federal government waived HIPAA privacy rights.
Yeah, no, we can do whatever we want.
Yeah, so it's only for the emergency area and only during the emergency period identified.
But it is important to know that these things occur and have that in your plan, which is, one of the things that we've stressed over and over is if you don't have it in the plan and you're trying to figure this out as you go, that's when the mess occurs.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't say massacre. I said mess occurs. But we'll have links to all of these resources on the website. And, these are the kind of things that if you go ahead and get them and include them in your documentation and allow your team to participate in reviewing them and understanding them, it's just everyone in your group should know these things. And, the more people in your organization that understand these resources, the more likely you are to be prepared when you need them.
Yep, I agree.
Well, then, we've done good.
That's all you need.
All right, well, I will have links plenty.
Yeah, the best show notes in the business, folks. No doubt.
We have worked hard to make improvements based on our listener survey, which you could also do.
Yep. helpmewithhippa.com/survey.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So that's our show for today, folks. So you have homework to do. Get busy.
Get jiggy with it.
Yeah. So you got lots of resources. There's no reason why you can say, I didn't know how to do it, or I didn't know what to do, or there's just tons of resources out there. It costs you $0 to get started on. So do that. Get started today.
Get jiggy with it. There you go.
Also want to remind you about the app in the App Store. Should also be in Google Play Store. Download that, check it out, rate it. We much appreciate it. Also, you can review us on iTunes, find us on social media, as well as helpmewithhippa.com. So for Donna and myself, remember, HIPAA is not about compliance. It's about patient care.
You've been listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, hosted by Donna Grindle and David Sims. The show created to help you with HIPAA. For more information or to ask us a question, visit our website at helpmewithhipaa.com. Neither Donna Grindle or David Sims are attorneys, and they do not offer binding legal advice concerning regulatory compliance. The information in this podcast should not be relied upon or construed as legal advice in any way. Consult your attorney for legal advice concerning compliance with HIPAA regulations.